Hello, everyone, and welcome back to This Week in Enterprise Tech. It has actually been an interesting week for seeing some of these mega vendors come together. So we're going to be talking about Salesforce, Workday, one of our favorite ServiceNow, of course, as well as probably Boomi, Google, OpenAI, and a few others showing up. And I've got to say that although I've been looking at those tech announcements, I'm also pretty excited because the Olympics have shown up. And I am just an Olympic fiend. You know, this is the time to look at team handball and rugby and all these other sports that you never see in the United States. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Well, that is exciting. I'm hoping to queue up my first view of the Olympics tonight. I was officiating a wedding this weekend, and so
Oh,
I
wow.
was out driving for 8 hours with the toddler on Friday, and then Monday back, and then Saturday, Sunday, all wedding activities. So I had no time to do anything. In fact, half the news I've been catching up on this morning, just trying to oh my gosh, what has the world been doing? Because our entire world was this wedding. So, but it was beautiful and the weather was amazing. We were up in the Thousand Islands area of New York, which, trivia point, that's where the name of the salad dressing comes from. The Thousand Island sauce was invented there. So that's what I've been doing. So I'm excited to actually watch some of the Olympics tonight.
Excellent. And while all the countries out there duke it out for first place across every sport known to man, we can dig into all the tech, enterprise tech known to man, and what's going on there.
Tech Olympics this week.
Yes,
There we go.
the Tech Olympics. Yes. So, of course, pretty appropriately, two of the biggest heavyweights in enterprise software decided to make an announcement last week. Both Salesforce and Workday decided to announce a joint AI employee service agent. You know, it's interesting to see because obviously we know these two vendors as serving honestly very different parts of the business, and the fact that they are willing to work together is both interesting and perhaps a little concerning, a little confusing. What do you think about it, Charlie?
Well, I don't know that I found it either confusing nor disconcerting. I think that it is very emblematic of where this is going. We've been talking about this for a while now, that people like Microsoft have 130 co-pilots, and everyone and their brother has their own version of an AI agent of some form, all the varying degrees of sophistication. And the great challenge is we're seeing these stovepipes develop where, if you're an employee in this environment, it's like, well, what the heck do you use? And in the end, the ultimate goal, I believe, is that every employee has their own personal co-pilot that is trained on exactly all the aspects and facets of their job and can answer any question they need answered. So this idea of these two very large players who represent a very large swath of the enterprise workflow coming together to have a unified agent experience makes a ton of sense. What I'm slightly so I should say, I'm going to put a period there, because that
Okay.
makes sense, and it's I understand why they would do it. What I think is interesting about the announcement, I think there's a little bit of making hay involved, in that they're touting things like Salesforce has what I think they call it the zero copy policy or whatever, where this idea that we want data to stay in place. And what I find most interesting about it is that any good co-pilot is going to be able to leverage APIs, to leverage a mix of generative AI and RAG and other modalities to connect to data sources and to perform this function. I don't know that I fully understand why I would need to have a quote unquote partnership between Workday and Salesforce to accomplish this, or that it in and of itself is anything special other than a marketing sort of ploy. But if you're a customer of one of these two companies, which obviously most enterprises are, and this represents a huge chunk of sort of the employee experience landscape, I can see that it makes a very easy entryway of saying, oh, use this now unified agent, and you have access to this huge swath of CRM and customer data and employee data, or finance data and employee data from Workday. And it's like, I think that makes sense, but I'm not sure that from a technology perspective it's anything earth shattering.
Yes, interested in seeing how this integration ends up taking place. Traditionally, Salesforce, of course, has been a gigantic ecosystem play for a long time where everybody links to Salesforce data in some way to support their sales, service, or marketing. But Workday has been more of a standalone software platform for the most part. It's harder to find applications that are directly built on the Workday platform that have grown to significant scale. And seeing Workday partner more closely with Salesforce, I think is a step towards the direction of Workday trying to figure out how to become more deeply engaged with the rest of the enterprise. And this idea of bringing sales and HR data together, I feel like that has been a holy grail goal for the enterprise for a really long time, trying to figure out how to bring external behavior and internal behavior together to get a holistic view of the business. And although that has been a very straightforward goal, it has also been very difficult to actually achieve in practice. If you ask me right now, how do my HR policies affect my sales efficacy? I don't really have that answer. I have the sales operations data, and then I have all this separate stuff around HR policies and payroll, and maybe training, and maybe some learning and development and improvement data, and maybe some succession strategic data as well. But those two don't really come together very well. I'm curious to see if there end up being either efficiencies or eureka moments that come from bringing these two sets of data more closely.
Yeah, I'm not convinced that we're going to see that. I mean, I think if they do go that direction, and in effect use this to create an abstraction layer, then this will be noteworthy. I'm not convinced that that's what this is. I think this is just a kind of a universal access plane. And I think it fits very well with, I mean, Workday made it very clear earlier this year that this is the direction they wanted to go, that they wanted to be more of a platform, that they wanted to be more of an enterprise player and to play nicely in the sandbox, which was obviously a shift from some of their previous positions. So I think in that regard, this makes sense, and it's a smart move for Workday. I think it also speaks to a degree to some of the challenges that Salesforce has had in executing, insofar as, you know, if you remember, Benioff was on stage, I think it was like 4 years ago, touting some of this sort of capability that using Einstein, you could ask it questions at the time we were using like Alexas. And, you know, and it looked like this whiz bang, and of course it never really lived up to it. And so I think, you know, I think this is also an effort to finally make progress on all of this. So look, I think it's positive. I think it's good. I think we're going to see a lot more of this sort of stuff. I'm not sure it's all of that at this stage, but I think it's a good step and indicative of where things are going.
Yes, I do think it's a little ironic though that Salesforce pretty much bought Slack to do this, to create this overriding UX that would give you access to all of your big applications, including Salesforce. And now they're able to do it, but Slack is really an afterthought in creating this employee service agent. Probably Salesforce, I'm sure, will correct me if they think I'm wrong about this one. But to me, it really looks like this is more based on other AI services. Workday has been working a lot with Google's AI. Salesforce, of course, has a lot of its own AI capabilities up above and beyond Slack and Tableau and all the other traditional analytics and messaging stuff that they have. So I'm interested in how some of that knitting happens as well. But it's starting to look like Salesforce had the right idea with the Slack vision, but ironically isn't really using Slack as a platform to end up getting there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a whole nother separate conversation. I think the Slack of all of the acquisitions, Slack has always been the one that I felt was most misguided. But all of that said, I do think that this announcement with Workday is still at least more real than the other one that you wanted to bring up, which was the ServiceNow's, I guess, partnership, if you want to call it that, with Boomi. And I had to read this press release 3 times to like scratch my head on it. So I'll let you set it up, and because I have some pretty strong opinions and I don't want to taint the water on this one.
Oh, you can taint the water and poison it all you want. But the part that I did find interesting is that ServiceNow is coming together with Boomi, specifically around API management and automation. And I think that is a layer that we've been talking about for a really long time and called all sorts of different names. It's been middleware and SOA and all of these other things, all of these service-based integration capabilities. And we're finally starting to get to the vision of what service-oriented architecture was supposed to be now that we actually have APIs for all of our major applications. And now it's more more of trying to contextualize, generalize, and smooth out all of the integrations with each other. So I find that interesting that ServiceNow and Boomi are working together on this, partially because I would have thought that ServiceNow would have wanted to do this itself. And I would have thought that Boomi would have been interested in doing this themselves as well, but apparently they feel like they need to work together because one side does automation really well while the other side is so good at APIs that they need to bring this together. But to me, it feels like two sides of the same coin that a single vendor could have also gone after.
Well, this is why I wanted you to go to first, because you are being so much more. I'm being super cynical on this one. I read this, and my take on it was that basically ServiceNow was trying to land a deal with Boomi, and as part of the terms of this deal, Boomi says, "Well, then you have to use our product, and you have to put it in," because ServiceNow does have a lot of those capabilities already in house. They can do a lot of this, and I think Boomi is, if not best in class, in the best in class category of integration plays, and I think their technology is superior to what ServiceNow had in house. And I think that there's no question that if you're going to have an automation platform, you need to have a robust integration and API layer to manage that. And so I think that's a good thing for ServiceNow. But when you read it, it's like the focus is that Boomi is using ServiceNow to run. I forgot what ServiceNow's product. They have a specific product that's for service providers, basically, and that's what they're using. And they say, "Oh, and by the way, ServiceNow is also going to be doing this." And it was like, So I don't know. Maybe I'm reading it wrong, but it felt a little bit like, "Hey, we need to go and say this so that we can get this deal done because we want to go sell you our software." So I don't know. Maybe I'm being cynical on it, but that was kind of my read when I read it.
Although honestly, it's probably a large deal.
I'm
And
quite sure it is.
yeah, when I was at Boomi's Analyst Day earlier this year, they made it extremely clear that they were going to be very aggressive about expanding their reach over the course of the year, looking at more everything from they're already well known in application integration. They definitely made a mark in API management after their acquisition of the Mashery assets, I suppose I should technically say. And then they're also looking at data integration and basically the soup to nuts workflow. For me, this looks like Boomi is taking a step towards automation and honestly kind of using the ServiceNow platform as a stepping stone. I suppose for ServiceNow, the deals are so big at this point that, Boomi is just, the Boomi capabilities are just a tuck into whatever $5 million or $10 million deal they're
yeah, and that's kind of how I'm looking. I mean, I think Boomi may end up being, another one of these stories that apparently I'm bad at predicting the future because I have a whole litany of these where I've said these guys are done and they seem to come roaring back. And I think Boomi may be one of those success stories. I was, fairly down on Boomi, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. And then over the last few years, really, as we came out of the pandemic, they got some new leadership and started making some really smart moves and making themselves relevant again. I think that this is good. And I look at even if it's what I think it is, being cynical from a ServiceNow perspective, I think from Boomi's perspective, it's smart, right? If they've decided they're going to go down this road and they need to buy a piece of software to manage their business anyway, well, why not turn it into a strategic partnering deal to sort of force their way into the thing and get some press off the juggernaut that is ServiceNow. So look, I think this is smart by Boomi standards. I'm just a little bit more cynical on the whole ServiceNow thing, and maybe it's tainted. I don't know, but I think the challenge that I have with, and it's less a function of ServiceNow and more a function of the fact that when you get to this size and you are still going out to the street and putting these really amazing, strong growth projections out there, you end up having to really, I think you start putting yourself in a position where I don't want to say you're making bad decisions, but you're just, you're starting to have to really push it to grow at that rate still. And we saw the same thing with Salesforce, right? It just, when they start growing that big, getting that big and trying to continue to maintain that rate of growth, it just becomes super, super hard, I think, to kind of stick to the knitting. So, we'll see.
Yeah, and honestly, we kind of saw that there's an unfortunate ServiceNow story last week as well from executive perspective, where their president and COO, CJ Desai, resigned from the company. All we really know about it is that there seem to have been some issues associated with the U.S. Army or complaints with the DOJ, Department of Justice, seeming to be around some perhaps conflict of interest or perceived conflict of interest. And it was seen as big enough to make this move. And personally, I think it's a shame. I've chatted with CJ on several occasions. I know he's very smart around the company as a whole, around what ServiceNow does. But anytime you are working with the military or in a government deal, there are just certain rules that you cannot break around conflicts of interest that frankly don't exist in the general corporate world.
Yeah, I don't, we do not know a lot about this.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that this came to light apparently through an internal complaint in March, and they conducted an internal investigation, and at the conclusion of that investigation, he was asked to, or they mutually agreed to resign the same day, effective immediately. And that to me says that whatever this was is not insignificant. I mean, Bill McDermott in his public announcements, at least the initial ones, really significantly downplayed it. But it was also notable in this article that we're referencing on CIO that Raj Iyer, who was the CIO of the Army who ServiceNow hired, came out. I mean, his exact quote is, "I resigned because I didn't want to be associated with this fiasco in any way." And so, without knowing exactly what the heck this is, some of the other analysis I read seemed to imply that they think that maybe he was trying to leverage that in ways that, as you said, there's very strong ethical standards about what they can and can't do. So I have no idea, but to me, it reinforces what I was talking about, that I think when they get to this size and they're trying to maintain that high level of growth rate, which we're talking growing billions of dollars of revenue a year. I mean, those are just massive numbers, that it ends up you start to see the bolt shake out of the ship, and I think that could be indicative of some of what we're seeing here. So, we'll see where this shakes out, and if this was a much ado about nothing or not, but it was very shocking. And I think it's a huge, huge loss for ServiceNow, because he was, CJ was absolutely one of the kind of heartbeats of the organization.
Yes, it's not a decision that could have been made lightly. And frankly, I expect to see him show up at some other startup, some other company. They probably won't let him work as much on a direct government sales or hiring deals, given this. But there's so much more to running a tech company than simply that piece of the puzzle. And he's obviously done a solid job in many other areas.
Well, and he was a brilliant operator. And if there's one company that needs a brilliant operator today, it's OpenAI. So maybe there'll be an opening for him. There's some additional news there. I mean, there's always news about OpenAI. I feel like we should rename this, This Week in OpenAI. And this week, the big news is that they have officially, something that was rumored actually for quite some time now, that they are going after Google in a big way with what they're calling SearchGPT. I haven't actually seen it live. I've seen some of the screenshots and some of the video demos, and honestly, it's a little underwhelming. I mean, I think basically it's a UI change. I mean, the ChatGPT 4.0 already had extensive search capabilities. You could already ask it to perform a search and to summarize results and do all the things. And I don't know that there's any thing significant here from a technology perspective, other than the fact that they've made the UI much more search-like, I think, and clearly going after Google and Bing and Perplexity. But as we've talked about, and I know there's another article that you wanted to reference about the fact that they're losing gobs and gobs of money.
Mhm.
And the question is this gonna move the needle in some way? Is this gonna be the pathway for them to actually make this work?
Yeah, I find it fascinating that OpenAI truly is treating this as a winner take all and take all the risks possible. I will give Sam Altman credit for taking this, for trying to do as much as humanly possible, talking about doing everything from search to chips and trying to own the entire the entire AI ecosystem to the extent that it's possible. That said, it's starting to feel like a lot of money is getting spent without a very visible goal or like midterm end game. Like where do we go in the next year to 2 years? And there have been reports. The information came out with claims that basically OpenAI has about 12 months of money left to work with, based on it, despite having raised billions of dollars, because it literally costs that much to do all the testing and model building associated with what they do. They are actually a company where the employee payroll is not the actual largest cost, at the way that most tech companies work. In most startup tech companies, you raise that $20 million, frankly, because you need all that money for payroll for your talent over the next couple of years. In OpenAI's case, payroll is actually only about 20% of their costs, and the rest of it is just compute, compute, compute all day long, with whatever methods they're using to try to get to every single product under the sun, because they are also dealing with Meta, and they're dealing with Perplexity and Cohere and Anthropic and Google, and everybody else wants to eat their lunch too. This is a really competitive world with billions of dollars being spent by everybody.
Yeah, I think it's, I want to say I'm turning bearish on them, but I do think they need to figure out a business model and they need to do it quickly. I think we all thought that the Microsoft relationship was going to be the thing that sort of cemented that. But that hasn't really proven, especially because we learned that so much of Microsoft's investment was actually in the form of compute, which, as you just pointed out, is a huge part of their cost model. So that does make sense. But Microsoft is also making it very clear that they're not putting all their eggs in the OpenAI basket. And
Yes.
so, I think this is definitely a challenge. And I think the whole Search GPT thing is going to go one of two ways. It's either going to be seen as the brilliant move that ultimately saves them, because obviously, if you look at Google, search is a massive business if you can monetize it,
Mhm.
from an AI perspective. Or it's going to be seen as the death knell, because it was folly going after Google that has insanely deep pockets. And while OpenAI's very existence created a whatever, I forgot Google called it, the red alert or whatever, right? Where it's like, we have to respond to this. This is now a full frontal assault on them, and I think it's very clear that that this is now sort of all out war, and so we'll see how that plays out. Um, and I'm really torn, because on the one hand, I indirectly, I don't actually have an account with OpenAI anymore. I closed it, and I now use others that pay OpenAI indirectly because of the API access, right? That's what I'm using. Um, and so I use OpenAI daily via the different systems I use. But every system I use has access to Anthropic and to Llama and to all these different. So it's like, if they went away tomorrow, it's not even going to affect me that much, because I've got access to every other model through the systems I already use. In fact, that's why I went that direction. It was my way of hedging my bet to give myself access to whatever model I might want to use. And I think that's the great risk, is that it is shocking how fast, with this crazy of a technology, how quickly it's truly become commoditized. And
Mhm.
I think that's the big challenge in front of OpenAI, is how do you keep it from doing that? Um, and find a business model that makes sense.
Right. And it seems like the only true high value uh, use case I've seen so far is really around coding. And even there, it limits to what LLM can really do to help with coding assistance. And uh, so we'll see
Well, so
where.
that's an interesting segue because this is where I struggle with all of this from a business model perspective. So I do pay for two separate AI services via these two platforms,
Mhm.
um, and I'm a firm believer in it. I use them, like I said, every single day, and in different ways. And I look at this and say there is an unquestionable business model. And you found a kind of a collection of articles, which I always love when you do this, that were sort of arguing with themselves. Because one of them talks about how 77%, this is a Forbes article, 77% of employees report that AI has increased their workload and actually hampered productivity. And another one talks about from VentureBeat talks about how Gen AI is. I love that someone actually did a study on this and actually controlled for it, and said that it actually showed that it does improve creativity.
Mhm.
And perhaps over the collective whole, maybe a little less diversity because it ends up looking similar. But on the individual level, and I've certainly found this, that it helps break through writer's block and a bunch of other things when you're trying to get out of your single-minded perspective, because we all can get trapped through that. And so I think that there is still so much untapped here that we don't really understand how it's going to improve things. I'm not buying the forums one about the 77%. I read through it and I didn't really see where that was coming from other than just perspective and you're like just like personal opinion that it's causing more work. But I found that very odd. And so what was your take on all of this? I mean, how do you see these things sort of coming at from two different perspectives?
Yeah. So first of all, I did a lot of survey work when I started as an industry analyst. I spent my first 4 years at a company called the Aberdeen Group, where we benchmarked hundreds and hundreds of executives. And one of the most important things I learned from that whole exercise is that surveys are a lagging indicator by definition. You are talking to people and then publishing those results probably a couple of months later. And those results themselves reflect what those people have experienced over the past 6 to 12 months. So, what you're really getting by the time you're able to analyze and publish these numbers is usually something, the feeling from, say, 6 months ago, rather than something that is completely up to date. So, that's a dirty secret around tech surveys. I still think they're very useful for understanding general feelings around technology, but there's always going to be that lag. Whereas if you get the right sample of people who you can talk to within 2 to 4 weeks, that is going to give you a more timely understanding of what is happening in the market. But of course, you lose sample size. So there's always going to be these trade-offs. That meta discussion aside, I do think it's interesting that 77% of employees said that they were struggling to use AI because it added to their workload. But basically, everybody on the C-suite side said, yeah, 80% ish, saying that we have increased our demands on workers and expect them to get more productivity. And we're giving them AI with the expectation that they will be able to figure out what to do with it. And there needs to be some middle ground. Back in my day, we called them business process analysts, people who actually mapped how things got done and then figured out what tools needed to be used and in what way to be able to get those productivity gains. And right now, I feel like a lot of that is being skipped because we're just hoping that people on the ground, people doing the actual work will figure it out for themselves. But these same people have 5, 10, 20 years of experience doing a job one specific way already, and asking them to use AI isn't necessarily going to help because they have to destroy a lot of their existing workflows and habits simply to integrate AI in the first place.
Well, I do think one of the things, I mean, maybe what frustrated me with the whole Forbes article in this particular, I don't even know who did the study, but was was it? I felt like it was this super overarching sort of sentiment. And as we've talked about, AI means a lot of different things. It can come in a lot of different forms, and how well it's integrated, and what types of AI we're using, and where in the workflow and how in the workflow can impact so much of it. So, I mean, if I still have trouble understanding how it makes you less productive. It may, I mean, I think it's a very fair argument or a fair thing to think that we're not going to see the productivity gains from it, that it's not going to deliver, particularly against the high cost that we're seeing. That I think is very fair. I have trouble seeing how it's making things harder. Um, to me, it would seem like the worst case scenario is it's net neutral. But I do think it goes to what we had talked about in the past here as well. That I'm a huge believer in what I call ambient technology or ambient AI, where it becomes proactive instead of reactive. It's inserting itself into into a workflow, into a process, and it says, hey, this is something that maybe you've missed, or here's an opportunity. And it's sort of like the Apple Maps or Google Maps, where it says, hey, I found a faster route, right? That kind of an idea where it's proactively helping and guide you. And I think that a lot of organizations, to your point, haven't done the hard work of connecting those dots, right? Because that takes contextual understanding of the workflow, of the process, and saying, how can I embed AI into this in an intelligent, intrinsic way that actually works. But I think I have to believe there's just a lot of fear embedded into some of those particular numbers that were causing that to rise up.
Yeah, I think back to the innovator's dilemma and how we have these early adopters and early majority, and basically trying to figure out which sections of people are really ready to go. And honestly, there's always a first 20% who understand how to do their job better and are willing to be flexible to do it. And there's always that other 80%, there's the 30% that comes along as the early majority who kind of get there. And then, we call them laggards because, they're lagging behind, but also, there's a lot of them. There's always going to be a lot of laggards who are either stuck in doing things a specific way because they have learned to process so deeply, or they simply aren't willing to accept that there are better ways to do something, because how could you perfect on something that I've already done 7,000 times, and incrementally improved in my own manual way all along the way.
Well, it goes back to the challenges, and we're going to talk about the CIO side of this in a second. I think that from a CIO perspective, you need to be doing exactly what you just talked about, right? Looking at this holistically and asking yourself, how can I strategically leverage this technology to drive productivity gains and to drive competitive differentiation through the experience, or whatever that might be, but not just throwing this over the wall and hoping that it actually has an impact. But I also think this speaks a little bit to the vendor side, in that we've had a bit of a challenge where, as often happens, technology vendors are in love with the technology and are not necessarily looking at the business problems and looking at the actual business value that you can create with it. And they're just sort of throwing it out there. And so a recent article by Rex Woodbury, who he publishes the Digital Native Substack, and we're fans of his. He's a venture capitalist who just kind of puts out some really great, insightful stuff. And he has a new article out called "AI as a Services Revolution," and there's a lot to it. But one of the big things here was that he's sort of making the case that one of the big challenges is that we're missing the killer app for AI. We're missing the thing that really is the linchpin that drives this fundamental change that then organizations build an ecosystem around. And that until that happens, or maybe more to the point, if you're the organization that does that, then you have the opportunity to really stake some ground, and that's the part of the missing link. That right now, so far, we have people like OpenAI and Microsoft just sort of throwing these chatbots out there and going, okay, go do amazing stuff with it, go be productive. And to your point, for some of us, we can figure out how to do that, but for the vast majority, it's just like, now what do I do with it? And that's sort of the gap.
Yeah, I thought Rex brings up this interesting quick framework about what makes an LLM kind of work, or an AI startup works. And he has this 3 steps. Basically, One, pick a large text-heavy services industry. Number two, use LLMs to automate workflows. Number three, use industry-specific data. And that makes a whole lot of sense. And I know a recent announcement in the legal tech space was a Clio, kind of the market-leading legal tech company there, raised $900 million. It's the most money that any legal tech company has ever raised. And I'm sure it's because of this, because people are seeing this opportunity to get into a market leader in one of these text-heavy markets and then totally transform the workplace. And whether that works or not, the money is their venture capital firms and PE firms, private equity firms have tons of money right now that they are just trying to figure out where to put. So this seems as good of a bet as any.
Yeah, well, they're sort of playing roulette with it, but I think
Yeah.
Going back and some of my skepticism over the Salesforce-Workday announcement is rooted in this, right? It's like, well, where is that killer app? Where is that that formula that Rex just lays out?
Mm-hmm.
Where does that play here? And it doesn't really, right? It's just sort of providing access to the data, and that may be nominally useful and nominally productive gaining, but the key word in that is nominal. And so if it's going to truly be transformative, it has to be something that actually changes that paradigm. And I think that is a challenge. So I think there's definitely the vendor side. I also think it's the CIO side. So there's another article from CIO.com, which I'm normally not a fan of a lot, even though I've written historically for CIO.com. I've generally not been very pleased with their articles, but lately they've been producing some really good stuff. And this is another one. I think we've referenced two just this week. And this one talks about the fact that CIOs have finally sort of crossed the chasm here, where the predominant posture is that of being a change agent, which, if you've spent any time talking to CIOs over the last couple of decades, that hasn't been the case. And this article makes a really interesting point, not because CIOs haven't wanted to be, but they were sort of boxed in. And the rise of Gen AI has sort of knocked down the gates, so to speak. And now it's like, okay, you need to be leading this change forward. You need to help us figure out how to leverage this technology to take advantage of this momentum and to figure out what to do with this. And so now it's like it's shifted, and that CIOs have to be that change agent. And I thought it was something I believed for a very long time. So I was gratified to sort of see some data backing this up. And then I think that also leads then to this whole conversation about, well, part of that being a change agent is taking a very aggressive stance on how to effectively leverage these technologies, and not just go, and no offense to Microsoft and their copilots, but not just drop a Microsoft copilot on someone's desk and say, good luck, right? It's about how do you do that? And so there's another article about Morgan Stanley and some of their approaches to it, but I'll pause before we get to that part of it and just kind of take your read, because I know you spend a lot of time talking to CIOs as well. I mean, what's your sort of, do you think this is finally the moment?
Yes, I'm actually glad to see it, because I feel like for the past decade, we've talked a lot about the CIO role often being honestly more of an operational role, where your job is just to keep the lights on. And we're figuring out, is the CIO becoming the chief utilities officer, where networking and uptime is basically the same as your water bill or your electric bill, just things that need to be turned on. And now we're actually talking about the innovation that has to go along with technology. And it's odd to me, to some extent, that we've had to create all of these new types of positions, like the chief digital officer or chief technology officers has been a little bit older, but we have all these other chief roles that honestly are the CIO's job. But so many CIOs got pushed away from the tech, or just didn't keep up with modern technologies. So we had to make up these new jobs to talk about what the CIO does. And now we're getting back to having the CIO, the information officer, actually in charge of informing and information and how work needs to become more digital. That's always been the CIO's job. And now we're getting back to making that a core CIO responsibility again across the board. I think that is the right way to go fundamentally.
Yeah. I agree. I've said that for a long time, is that if you're a CIO and suddenly your company hires a chief data officer, a chief transformation officer, a digital officer, that just is a sign that you're probably not doing your job and you need to kind of step that up. And I do think there's another, I don't know if we talked about it on the show or not. July 8th, there was a Wall Street Journal article that talked about the fact that finally the majority of CIOs are reporting to CEOs that CIO pay is skyrocketing. And it's all these same reasons. These are all the same thing, because I think the role has finally reached that point. And I agree with you. I think that, whatever we call a title, but the information at least indicates that it's not just about the technology. It's about the application of that technology into business value in some way. And that is what the CIO's job should always have been, and is most certainly all about now. How do you create competitive advantage? And I know we're running out of time. We've been running long, but the article that we referenced about Morgan Stanley, what I think is interesting about it here is less the specific. It's about the fact that Morgan Stanley is not taking OpenAI's platform off the shelf, but instead is working in collaboration with OpenAI to sort of create their own. Whether that's the right strategy or not is sort of irrelevant. I think there's a bunch of different versions of this. Cohere, which is another LLM company that is building enterprise-specific tool sets to build this. Of course, Databricks and Snowflake, we've talked a lot about in the past, and their ability to help enterprise create LLMs. I think that the salient point here is that the Morgan Stanley CIO is coming to market and saying, we need to be leveraging this technology to create competitive advantage. We need to build it into our workflows. We can't just do what I was talking about, just throwing it over the wall and hoping workers find productivity out of it. We need to take this proactive stance. And I think that's the big, if you put these two together, if you're going to be a change agent, right now, part of that is leading this change and figuring out how to make AI work for your organization. And don't just assume you can sign up for another subscription and assume it's going to do anything.
Yeah, and it comes back to first understanding what the killer use case is for your organization. A lot of thought has to be put into that in the first place, and then starting to figure out the details, such as, do we need a trillion parameter model, 100 billion parameter, 10 billion parameter, 1 billion parameter model? What is going to work from a compute and storage perspective? It's going to be the nuts and bolts of creating custom software, probably with consultants at this point. That is how this market looks, because there isn't that necessarily that killer app that is widely scalable. We have a bunch of great models that are able to do interesting things, and we have to work with those models to get to the endpoint. So because we are at this interstitial kind of in the middle of where this is eventually going to be 5 years from now, we have to take these steps and think about them. So I think that Morgan Stanley mindset right now is actually going to be the dominant mindset in terms of actually deploying AI successfully. And just a shout out to Isabella Bosquet, who we seem to quote, pretty much every week. Yeah, she's doing a great job covering this space. You should definitely be following her work on the Wall Street Journal if you're not already.
Absolutely. I think it's a big lesson on both sides. If you're a CIO, you need to be taking that aggressive stance, and I think the whole SaaS era, and I'm still a big believer in SaaS, right? But it sort of lulled people into thinking we can just go rent whatever we need. And I think that we need to have the stronger sense of ownership over the tech. And if you're a vendor, find that sweet spot, find that space where you have that opportunity where all these are converging. And create that killer app, because that's the going to be the avenue to success in this space.
Great. That's a great place to end. And with that, we're going to call it another week happening in enterprise tech. If you're following along online, please subscribe, please like, please comment. We always want to hear from you and get an idea of what you want us to discuss for next week. So looking forward to hearing from you, and we'll see you next week.
Right. Another one in the books.
Yep.
All right. I realized I should follow her. Do you follow her on social?
I think I have her on Twitter or
It says follow.
Yeah.
Oh my God, she looks like a kid.
Yeah, she's only a couple years out of college. I mean, she's not, a grizzled veteran, but I think that she nails it week after week. Like
Yeah.
whatever her beat is or however she defines it, like it works.
To go and drop her in here. So I guess you can actually sign up for like updates just from home. Interesting.
Mhm.
All right. Well, good stuff. And pick it up again next week.
All right,
Let's see
sounds
if we have
good.
any scheduling issues. No, that was today. I'm so out of it. You sent this update for today. I thought, what's he doing in July?
Yeah, we're in July. Hey.
Like, oh my God. Um, okay. I look like I'm good so far, at least out into early September. We may have an issue in middle of September. I may be in Austria, but
Yeah,
otherwise we're good for right now.
I start being on the road pretty much every week after Labor Day. So yeah, we'll start
Okay.
having to figure that out again.
Yep. All right. I think that's it for now. Have a good one.
All right, sounds good. Take care.